Hello, I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine, editor here at Iceland Review. Did you know that October 9th is a very special day here in Reykjavík? Why? We'll find out this and lots more in this episode of Iceland News Review. I'm here at a park that surrounds the pond known as Tjörnin in Reykjavík. Tjörnin meaning the pond. It's a very literal name. Behind me there's some rowan trees. You can see with these berries, and I don't know if you can hear them, you probably can't, but birds are absolutely going crazy around here because at this time of year, these berries begin to get a bit overripe, and then the birds like to descend upon them and eat these berries, not just for nourishment, but also because it's intoxicating, because the berries are fermented a bit. And so the birds are essentially getting drunk, and like a lot of drunk humans, drunk birds will start yelling and screaming at each other, and it's very cacophonous, but I don't know, I kind of enjoy it because it means the birds are enjoying themselves. Anyway, I had mentioned October 9th, and that is because on October 9th, the imagined peace tower at Viðey Island, just north of Reykjavík, is illuminated, as it was for the 18th time this October 9th. And it was a very special occasion because, as I recently reported, they did a lot of repairs and maintenance to it. If you're not familiar with the imagined peace tower, you'll see some photos of it now. It's essentially 15 spotlights aimed straight up at the sky with a beam of light, and it's illuminated every October 9th because this is a gift from the artist Yoko Ono, who gave this tower to us in 2007 to commemorate John Lennon. On October 9th, that marks his birthday, and the tower is typically illuminated until December 8th, which is the anniversary of Lennon's assassination. But it's also illuminated on New Year's Eve and on January 6th. If you are from Eastern Europe, you might know January 6th as Christmas. And in Iceland, this is called the 13th, or Þrettándan. And this is the very last day of Christmas. On this day, it's the very last day that you can legally set off fireworks. I emphasize legally because it'll often go on longer than that. Like, Icelanders, as you probably know, are very fond of buying fireworks and setting off just tons of TNT into the air. But the 6th is the occasion in which a great deal of them will be set off to mark the end of the Christmas holidays. And on this occasion of the lighting of the Peace Tower, some 1,200 people were in attendance, and the musicians Valdimar Guðmundsson and Eldjar did some performances, and a good time was had by all. I unfortunately was not able to be there myself, but every night you'll be able to see, from now on, you'll be able to see this beam aiming up into the sky. And if you're familiar with Ono's oeuvre, you know that she's a conceptual artist, and I think the idea of a tower reaching up into the heavens that's just made out of light and being called the Peace Tower is a really interesting concept for a piece of art. What you might not know is that when this was first proposed, it was actually kind of controversial. First of all, because Yoko Ono herself is a controversial figure. Well, I wouldn't say she herself is controversial. I would say that there's a lot of people who have some very, I don't want to dig into it necessarily, but there's some people who just, for whatever reason, don't like Yoko Ono, and so anything that she does or says is going to get made fun of. But so people raise this concern that, like, well, with this beam of light shooting up in the sky, I won't be able to see the northern lights anymore. First of all, you're going to have a very hard time seeing the northern lights in downtown Reykjavík as it is, with all the light pollution. But second of all, it turns out that that's not the case. There's many times when I've seen the northern lights behind this Peace Tower. It's very beautiful, it's very striking, and if you're ever in Reykjavík in the wintertime, look north and on any given night and admire this work of conceptual art that is now Iceland's own. We have a lot of good news to share in this episode, and there's one particular piece of good news that I was really excited to share with you all, because it's not very often that I get to report on a story involving people who have applied for international protection in Iceland, and it being good news. This is one such case. Yazan Tamimi. If that name is familiar to you, you've probably seen a reporting about this. If you haven't, just to give you some background, Yazan Tamimi is a 12-year-old boy from Palestine who has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a very severe form of muscular dystrophy that particularly targets boys. Most people who get this typically don't live beyond the age of 25, unfortunately. There's no cure for it, but there are treatments that are available that can make quality of life better, and Iceland is one of the countries where this is available. So, Yazan and his family came to Iceland from Palestine a little over a year ago, seeking international protection. And unfortunately, the Directorate of Immigration will oftentimes not examine cases, not even like open the case file for people who are applying for asylum if they had stopped in another country on their way to Iceland. Why is this? It's a little thing called the Dublin Regulation. Now, the Dublin Regulation is a very complex legal framework in Europe, but in a nutshell, it basically means that if you stop in any other country on your way to the country where you apply for protection, that country has the right, although importantly, not the obligation, to send you back to that country. Now, of course, there's no direct flights from Palestine to Iceland, and this family stopped in Spain. They got a passport stamp in Spain before going to Iceland, and so the Directorate of Immigration originally did not even open their case file, didn't examine any of the circumstances, and they wanted to deport them back to Spain where they don't know anybody, where they have no structure in place, where they would basically be helpless. This resulted in concerted protests from the public again and again and again, hundreds of people turning out at the Ministry of Justice and in front of Parliament, pleading with the authorities to grant this family international protection in Iceland, which they can do on humanitarian grounds. So what happened was, last March, the Immigration Appeals Board had ruled that the Icelandic government had 6 months to turn over Yazan's case to Spanish authorities and deport the family. And that 6-month deadline ran out on September 21st. As a result, the Directorate were then obliged to actually open their case file and examine their circumstances, and upon doing so, realized, okay, this family actually qualifies for international protection, and it was granted to them. So now they have a 2-year permit to live, work, get medical treatment, and all that in Iceland. This permit is renewable, and the lawyer for the family, who is named Albert Björn Ludvigsson, talking to reporters, raised a really good point, saying that, like, well, of course, they're very happy that they've finally been granted international protection in Iceland. They're still, trying to get over everything that they had to experience. Like, they were very nearly deported. Like, they had taken them all the way to the airport and were about to put them on a plane to go to Spain. The police were about to put them on a plane to go to Spain when the Minister of Justice, Guðrún Hafsteinsdóttir, intervened and halted the deportation. Now, there's some controversy now about whether or not she had the legal right to do that, but in the end, it's a very good thing that she did, one way or the other. But yes, it does make one wonder, like, why was it that this case wasn't examined in the first place? Considering especially that recent figures have shown us that applications for international protection in Iceland have been declining and deportations have been increasing. The caseload is clearly loosening, or, well, not loosening, but reducing. And if anybody qualifies for international protection in Iceland, it would be Palestinians, let alone a Palestinian that includes a disabled child. So we're all very happy that in the end, real justice won out and this family has a chance at a better life here in Iceland. Moving on, I haven't reported a lot about Reykjavík because there hasn't been a lot happening. However, they've put up a lot more protective barriers down there to the earthen dams, that block the lava flow. They've been steadily working on this. And the reason for this is that even though the eruption ended in September, there's still magma accumulation that they're detecting underneath of the peninsula. And so they want to be prepared. They have moved some 2.7 million cubic meters of earth in order to put up these protective barriers around the area at an estimated cost of 7 billion ISK, which is 52 million USD or 47 million euros. And so it's a very volcanic area. And even though the eruption's over and we've heard nothing about it, as I said, there's still magma accumulation, but also Reykjanes is now, they believe, in this new period of volcanic activity. The whole of Iceland is, of course, geologically active on a geological scale, but Reykjanes is now in a period of increased volcanic activity. That being said, the eruptions, they believe, are going to get farther and farther apart. This year has been extremely active for volcanoes, as you may have noticed, but the eruptions are spacing out more and more. And so the next one, who knows? It may be next month, it may be a couple months from now. It's impossible to say for certain. Volcanoes are a very fickle thing. They operate on their own schedule. So anytime you see someone talk about a volcano being overdue for an eruption, disregard that opinion. That's not how volcanoes work at all. But anyway, as I've said a couple of times, Southernes is a really beautiful area to visit, and especially now that the eruption's done, you are now more free to travel around the area and check out the sites. And if you do so, we recommend using today's sponsor for this episode, Blue Car Rental, who I've linked to in the description. Southernes is often overlooked. A lot of people just see it as the region where you go through it to and from the airport, but that would be a mistake. You can do a lot of looking around and seeing a lot of very beautiful things as a part of a day trip from Reykjavík. So again, check out Blue Car Rental and take the time to just look around the area. It's a very, very beautiful part of the country. If you have friends in Iceland and you're visiting, I highly recommend stopping at Dutyfree on your way. Not just if you're traveling alone. This is especially important if you're visiting Icelanders, because it's this custom. Like if you're in a workplace and somebody on the job goes on vacation somewhere and they come back, it is expected that this coworker is going to stop at Dutyfree and either get a lot of alcohol or a lot of candy and bring it back to the office to share with the coworkers. It's considered rude, in fact, not to do this. So if you're visiting Icelanders, definitely stop at the Dutyfree and pick up some stuff for your Icelandic friends. They'll be very impressed with your knowledge of Icelandic customs and mores. Related to this, there is in fact a new duty-free store that just opened at Keflavik International Airport. It covers some 2,400 square meters and has 16 self-service checkout machines with 4 staff checkout points. And so now you have even more options. As you know, if you've ever been through duty-free in Iceland, it can often be a very crowded experience. But if you're a person who enjoys alcohol, or you have to get a lot of alcohol for people, it's kind of essential to stop at duty-free because it's duty-free. And it's going to be a lot cheaper than buying alcohol here in Iceland, which is famously expensive, always has been. Like even when the economy was in the tank, it's always been extraordinarily expensive. So now you have more options where that's concerned. Just a little note wanted to share with you. If you're ever visiting friends in Iceland, or if you just enjoy duty-free in general, it's now going to be quite a bit hassle-free for you. Now you probably know that Iceland is a very progressive country. However, it's also a progressive country where change can be very slow to happen. It can take a long time to make these progressive steps. One such example of this is that come next July, gay men will now be allowed to donate blood. That's right, finally, they'll be allowed to donate blood. See, Iceland was one of 4 countries in Europe who still had a ban in place against gay men donating blood, the other 3 countries being Turkey, Kosovo, and Croatia. The change is due in part to the fact that there's now new testing. It's called an NAT blood screening. I don't know the specifics on this, but it apparently can scan for hepatitis B or C or the HIV virus very, very quickly. And so that's a big step forward, actually, because this ban has been in place for a very, very long time, and there have been concerted calls to lift it. What has possibly put pressure on the blood bank to lift this ban is the fact that there's a shortage of blood available. And so, you know, that probably helped in convincing them that it was time to join the 21st century and finally lift this ban, put these new screenings in place so that we can maybe alleviate the blood shortage. So good for the blood bank. Lastly, on Iceland News Review, I want to share with you an extremely beautiful story about the new Bishop of Iceland. Her name is Guðrún Karls Helgadóttir, and she was elected last May to the position of bishop. And in a lengthy interview in Heimildin, which is an Icelandic magazine, of all the things that you would think a Lutheran bishop would want to talk about at length, she chose to talk about her trans daughter. Now, I think this is a really important story, in particular if you're a parent and you have a trans child. 38 years old when she gave birth to this child, who at the age of 14 came out to her as being trans. So how did she respond to this? Well, she said that she had noticed that, like, up until this point, that her daughter had been feeling kind of bad, like depressed and withdrawn. And so she knew there was something wrong, that she wasn't feeling good. And so her coming out as trans, like, she understood, okay, my child is experiencing gender dysphoria. And now, as open-minded as she was, you know, it's not like she knew everything all at once. She didn't understand terms. She had to do some reading in terms of reading up on what her child might be experiencing. She also struggled with the new pronouns, and she also had to look into what sort of support could be available for her daughter. And she naturally also had, like, a period of adjustment to go through. And this is very normal for parents of trans children. So she turned to her friends who were also ministers. She turned to her faith, and her friends who were ministers, you know, advised her, like, you know, the most important thing is loving your child, and which she did. You know, she says in this interview that, like, from the start, she said, we love you and we support you, and we're going to do this together. So they got into contact with the medical team for trans youth at Landspítali Hospital, which is called BUCL, and to set up an appointment. And it took a very long time. It took about a year. So one thing that is very important to emphasize, that Guðrún also emphasized in the interview, is that trans minors are not offered any kind of surgery nor hormone replacement therapy until they reach a certain age. In fact, by law, trans youth are instead offered hormone blockers if they're younger than 16 years of age. So no, the hospital is not doing gender reassignment surgery on kids or even giving them hormone therapy. They're put on blockers instead, and then monitoring how things go very carefully, doing a series of interviews, and once they reach the age of consent, then if they still want to, they can begin hormone therapy and what have you. But the most important thing here, what I thought that was really beautiful about this interview, is that at the heart of it, we're talking about a parent who loves their child, believes their child, and wanted to support their child, and so she did everything she could. She wasn't perfect. She didn't know everything right off the bat. She had stumbles, she made mistakes, she had feelings to deal with, but at the core of it, she did the most important thing, which is to love and support her child. And as a trans person myself, when I came out, just as a personal aside, my father, he's considerably older than Guðrún is, and he also, you know, struggled with a new name and new pronouns and what have you. But that doesn't bother me, because the most important thing is he loves me and he supports me 100%. So if you have a trans child, don't worry too much about learning everything there is to learn about the trans experience, or not making any mistakes with pronouns or names. The most important thing you could do for your child is love and support them, which is the case for any parent. In fact, Guðrún concluded the interview by saying, "What I learned about myself is that a parent's heart can only grow," which I think is extremely beautiful. And you can read the full interview on icelandreview.com. It's, of course, linked in the description, along with all the other stories that we've discussed here today. And that's all I have for you today here on Iceland News Review. Remember, check out Blue Car Rental for all your car rental needs. I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine. We'll see you next week. Be good to each other.